Sumeru and Dendro, and therefore Dendro Traveler, have been around for over a month now, so you might be wondering why this video is only coming out now. Well, Nahida is dropping in North America tonight, and though there are people who can't wait to get her and replace Dendro Traveler immediately, some people are skipping her, or maybe they want to use both, or maybe want to know what to do if they lose their 50-50. In which case, good luck on your pulls no matter who you're pulling for. That being said, I want to talk about Dendro Traveler, aka DMC, and how they are a lot stronger than people give them credit for. Even when Nahida is here, DMC will continue to be a great Dendro support, and in some cases might even be preferable, or the two might even work really well together in some teams. I see a lot of people using DMC solely for Dendro application, forgoing their damage altogether, which is absolutely fine, but they also say that DMC doesn't contribute much else, and I'm here to dispel that a bit. Now, I'm not going to say that DMC has a ton of personal damage, but when built right, their damage is non-negligible and does contribute to the team's overall DPS. Before getting into their kit though, I do want to talk about some pros and cons about Dendro Traveler. Some pros are that they are a guaranteed Dendro character that everyone has, being an absolutely free character including their Ascension material, so no need for boss drops, as well as their Constellations. They can be fairly easy to build depending on what you're aiming for and are quite free to play friendly when it comes to weapon choices. Even the gacha ones can be obtained from regular wishes and even the standard banner. They have consistent Dendro application for enabling all Dendro reactions, with good uptime on their burst, as well as a built-in EM buff for the party, and once we get their final Constellation, an elemental damage boost, though both are tied to their burst. And as for cons, although I did say that DMC has some decent personal damage, it is not amazing, I won't argue that, and this is in part due to one of their biggest drawbacks, which is their incredibly high energy needs. DMC needs a lot of energy recharge, requiring you to run an ER Sands in almost all cases, which hard caps their damage ceiling. Their burst, which as I said does have good uptime aside from having a high energy cost, but unfortunately it's also circle impact, and the AoE is okay but not incredibly large unless you expand it once it interacts with Hydro, so if enemies stray too far from the field, you do lose a good portion of your Dendro application. Other units have similar issues though, so it doesn't make DMC less valuable, they're just things to keep in mind. So let's actually talk about the kit. Normal attacks, pretty standard sword user stuff and not at all important unless you're a hardcore Traveler main and using them on field. But as an off-field support, which is what I'm focusing on, you won't be using them. Their skill does a single slash that deals Dendro damage and applies Dendro. Think Kaya's skill, but Dendro. And it actually has higher multipliers. And it's on an 8-second cooldown. DMC's burst summons a Lee Lotus Lamp that deals continuous Dendro damage to enemies within its AoE. If it comes into contact with different elements, it undergoes the Lotus Light Transfiguration, which changes its properties as follows. With Hydro, the AoE gets larger, Electro increases the speed of the lamp's attacks, and Pyro causes an explosion that deals Dendro damage after a short delay and clears the lamp from the field. Only one such transformation can happen at a time, so you can control which one is applied by proper order of your character's skills when multiple elements are present. The lamp, unless exploded by Pyro, lasts 12 seconds at C0, has a 20-second cooldown, and a very expensive energy cost of 80. And I'll talk more about DMC's energy needs in the stats section. Their A1 passive grants a stacking elemental mastery buff to the active character in the AoE of the Lee Lotus Lamp, going up to 60 EM after 10 seconds at C0. The stacks do not clear when switching characters, so whoever is on the field when it reaches max stacks will receive the full buff. And their A4 passive grants a 0.15 damage boost to their skill and a 0.1 damage boost to their burst for every point of elemental mastery the Traveler has. Talent leveling priority, should you choose to, will be their burst, followed by or equal to skill, and normal attacks can be ignored. You don't necessarily have to level any of them if all you want is Dendro application, but as I've said, the damage on them is actually pretty decent, so it is beneficial to do so. The Traveler's Constellations are given to us as we progress through the game, and we are currently up to C5, but C6 should be given in this version. None of DMC's Constellations are game-breaking, but they are all useful and add value to their kit. C1 regenerates 3.5 energy for DMC when their skill hits an opponent, which isn't a lot considering their overall energy needs and expensive burst costs, but every bit counts, especially if you get in more than one skill per rotation. C2 increases the duration of the Lee Lotus Lamp from their burst by 3 seconds. More uptime, more damage, and more Dendro application. C3 increases their skill 3 levels for more damage. C4 makes it so that when the Lee Lotus Lamp is transformed by another element, it immediately grants 5 stacks from the A4 4 passive, so basically starts the EM buff at 30 right away. It's still capped at 60, but it's a nice quality of life improvement that shortens the time needed to attain max stacks for the full buff. C5 adds 3 levels to their burst, again more damage, and C6, which we don't have yet but will soon, which is very important, is that the active character within the AoE of DMC's burst will get a 12% Dendro damage buff, as well as a 12% damage buff for the element that caused a Lotus Light transfiguration. And I say not having this yet is important because right now it's part of why some people still think DMC is a bit underwhelming, but once we get it, it's going to greatly increase not only DMC's supportive capabilities, but also their own and the team's overall damage output. There are several ways you can build DMC, and you can absolutely build them for damage without sacrificing burst uptime when done right, but that depends entirely on how much you want to invest into them. So there are quite a few artifact sets and combinations to choose from depending on what team you run them in and what you want them to provide. The set that will immediately come to most people's minds is the Deepwood Memories set. The 2-piece grants 15% Dendro damage bonus, and the 4-piece effect lowers enemies' Dendro resistance by 30% for 8 seconds when hit by the holder's elemental skill or burst, which is quite significant since Dendro can't be swirled and therefore shredded with Viridescent Venerar, so aside from Zhongli's Universal Shred, this is currently the only form of Dendro Res Shred in the game. That being said, this is not always going to be the best set for DMC. It will benefit their personal damage, and it will be the best set when running in a team for Bloom and its variants, such as Hyper Bloom and Burgeon, since they all deal Dendro damage and benefit from the resistance shred from the set. And it will be the set you'd want to use on DMC if you're supporting Technari, who will capitalize on the Dendro shred for spread damage and can then run another set like Wanderers, for example. So this set can be a decent general purpose option. However, in something like an Aggravate team, this set will only get used from DMC themselves, as it offers nothing for the other units in the team, specifically your Electro Carry. In such a case, a set like the 4-piece Noblesse Oblige would be much better, as it provides a damage boost to DMC's burst as well as a 20% attack buff to the entire party, which is useful for the other characters in the team. This is the set I would personally recommend when running an Aggravate team specifically. Just make sure you can burst every rotation. You can also run DMC as a burst support by using the 4-piece Emblem of Severed Fate set. The 20% additional ER from the 2-piece is greatly appreciated by the Traveler, as they are very energy hungry, and since you are naturally loading up on energy recharge, the burst damage boost from the 4-piece effect can be great with the right substats. This is also a good temporary set to use while farming for Deepwood or Noblesse if you're going that route. The 4-piece Gilded Dreams set can also be good to maximize DMC's personal damage if they're the one proccing reactions, as it gives a ton of elemental mastery. So if they are consistently triggering Bloom or Spread, this can be a viable option. If they're not triggering reactions themselves though, or if you want to focus more on buffing your team, this set will lose value and one of the previously mentioned sets will be better. Another option, if you prefer to buff your party's elemental mastery instead of attack, is the 4-piece Instructor set. The 2-piece gives the holder 80 elemental mastery as well as 120 EM to the whole party for 8 seconds when the holder triggers an elemental reaction. In Aggravate teams that need the extra EM, this is very easy to do since DMC will trigger Quicken quite often. But in Bloom teams, you just have to make sure that DMC is the one triggering the actual Dendro seeds at least some of the time, which isn't altogether very difficult. Just keep in mind that they do have to trigger a reaction to proc the set effect. And note that though the extra EM kind of benefits DMC's kit, the set does hamstring their personal damage, but if you're using the set, it's probably for the buff it provides, so their damage doesn't really matter anyway. You just have to make sure you still have enough energy recharge to burst off cooldown. Generally not quite as good as the previously mentioned sets, but it can be a functional option for both early and late game. Mix and match 2-piece combinations of Deepwood, Emblem, Noblesse, and 80 EM sets can all be used as well. And if you're early AR and decided to just sneak into Sumeru to activate Dendro MC, 2-piece combinations of Exile and Scholar for the energy recharge as well as Instructor for the elemental mastery can all be used in the meantime. For main stats, no matter what set you're using, you'll pretty much always want an energy recharge sans, since DMC has really high energy needs, especially if they're the only Dendro unit in the team, which will often be the case. A Dendro damage goblet, and a crit rate or damage circlet, whichever you need for a balanced crit ratio, but a crit rate circlet would probably be ideal if you're using Fav Sword. A temporary attack or EM goblet can also be used until you get a Dendro one. DMC's burst is the most important part of their kit, so for substats you want to first and foremost prioritize energy recharge. They need about 200 to 250 ER depending on your team, rotation, and if Favonius or Xiphos weapons are being used, so get as much as you need to be able to burst off cooldown, and then look for crit rate, especially if equipping Fab Sword, crit damage, elemental mastery, and attack. Now moving on to weapons, there are actually quite a few to choose from. The Skyward Blade is a great option if you have it, as it has a good base attack which helps your traveler's damage, as well as a nice amount of energy recharge, 55.1 at level 90, which when paired with an energy recharge Sands allows for room to look for more offensive substats. Alternatively, the Favonius Sword is one of, if not the best 4-star option for DMC. It gives a ton of energy recharge, as well as being able to proc the white energy particles to further battery themselves, as well as the rest of the team. It does have a low base attack, so personal damage will take a hit, but if you need the energy recharge, it's worth the trade-off, as being able to burst reliably is much more important. The Sacrificial Sword is another option if you don't have Fab Sword, as it gives the same energy recharge stat and can allow for a second cast of your elemental skill for a little extra damage and energy. And since DMC's skill is fast, it won't extend your rotation significantly. Fab will generally be better if you have it available, but Sac Sword can be a decent alternative. Another good energy recharge weapon that is completely free as long as you can craft it is the Sapwood Blade. It has a high base attack for a 4-star and less ER than Fab and Sac at 30.6 at level 90, but can still be more than enough if you get good ER rolls on your artifacts. The leaf produced by the passive can also be picked up either by DMC themselves or whoever is proccing a reaction for the extra EM. The Amenoma doesn't give any base ER, but DMC can get all 3 stacks on the passive for the full energy refund, and it would take some finessing but could work if it's what you have and you're on top of your rotation. If you do have enough energy recharge to forego an ER weapon, the best weapon for personal damage and support, especially if DMC is proccing reactions, which in most teams is going to be the case, is going to be the Freedom Sworn. It's a 5-star limited weapon, so not everyone is going to have it, and if you do, it might be used by someone else, but in the case that you do have it and it's available and you don't need the energy recharge, this is one of your best options. The new sword, Zyphos Moonlight, offers a bit of both, with the Elemental Mastery stat as well as converting a percentage of your EM to energy recharge, as well as a smaller amount for the rest of your team. You do need to stack a lot of EM to get a really substantial energy recharge conversion, so if you need a lot of ER, it's better to just use an energy recharge weapon, but if you're building EM on your Traveler and you just need a little boost, this can be alright. The Iron Sting can also be a decent free-to-play option if you're proccing reactions and you already have enough ER as well. And last but not least, the Skyrider Sword offers a hefty 51.7% ER at level 90 and is a good placeholder just for the energy recharge in a pinch or at low AR. And finally, let's talk about teams. It's pretty straightforward since you just put DMC into any team that needs a Dendro unit, so I'll just go over some team templates and give a few examples. For Quicken teams, you just need DMC and an Electro unit, then 2 Flexes, which can be another Electro for Aggravate, another Dendro for Spread, and a Nemo support to swirl Electro, or defensive units like Zhongli for his shield and resistance shred, Albedo for off-field damage and his EM buff, or Diona for her shielding, healing, and EM buff at C6. Some examples of Aggravate teams are with Keqing, Kazuha, and Fischl, or Sino, Beidou, and Zhongli, and you can replace Keqing or Sino with Tighnari for a spread team, and other Electro options like Yaimiko in Shinobu can be swapped in, and Sucrose or Venti can be used in place of Kazuha if you don't have him or he's on your other team. For Bloom and its variants, you need DMC and a Hydro for Bloom, and then an Electro for Hyper Bloom or Pyro for Burgeon, and then a Flex, which can be another Dendro and or Hydro unit, a Shielder, or an Anemo support. Nilo with Kokomi, DMC, and Kole can work for pure Bloom, DMC, Singcho, Sino, and Beidou, or Kokomi, Sucrose, and Shinobu for Hyper Bloom. Sucrose and Shinobu can be swapped out for other units as well, like Kazuha and EM Raiden. And for Burgeon, something like DMC, Kokomi, Sucrose, and Toma. So play around with the team comps and see what you like. The great thing about Dendro reaction teams is that there are so many possibilities and they can all be really strong and very fun. The Dendro roster will be expanding eventually, starting with Nahida right now, but DMC is always going to be a strong and reliable choice for your Dendro needs, so don't discount or forget about them. As always, thank you so much for watching, like and subscribe for more videos to come, and I will see you next time.